Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about the HTML and CSS that's going to be super useful for designers who are just getting started building their web pages. If you'd like to know more about this and learn about this in more detail, you should head over to my website, lukefabish.com. Check out the URL below where you can read the full article. Okay, so here we go. And I mentioned in that introduction that we'd be looking at the HTML and CSS that web designers really need to know if they want to build their own web pages. You'd have to ask what part of CSS would not be useful. I mean, all of it would be useful. But what I'm going to be talking about today are the parts that you can't really do without. I say that because as a designer, a Photoshop or Sketch wielding designer, they can fill in a lot of gaps just by exporting a bunch of pictures and making a web page. It'd be like really slow and heavy, take a long time to load and not be very responsive, but you can make it work, but you can't really do anything about text. And so today that's what I'm going to be talking about, is what we can do to make our text look nice, make it flow nicely, and make sure it's laid out nicely on the page. And so here is our page, unstyled. It has headers, it's got an H1, it has two H2s, and the text you see is just inside some paragraph tags, and there's no CSS defined yet. And as you can see, it looks pretty gross. And so what we're going to be doing today is working on this bit of text just to sharpen it up a little bit. So this is the first thing we're going to do. We'll set the page width to 35 ems. I know designers are going to know what ems are. For all the developers out there, if you don't know, an em is the width of a capital M in whatever typeface or font we happen to be using at the time. The point of it about that is that it's a proportional width. So if we change the size of our font, then the size of our layout changes as well proportionally. It's very nice. And then we're going to set our margin to 0 auto. 0 meaning this is like a shorthand. When we just have two like that, the 0 stands for top and bottom, the auto stands for left and right. 0 meaning don't put any margin on the top and bottom, and auto meaning use all the available space on either side so that it puts it in the middle. And so here is our code. And you can see it's a pretty plain Jane HTML page. We've got our body, we've got our H1, paragraph, H2, paragraph, another H2, and a paragraph, and that's it. And now let's put our styles in. Boom, that was fast. And we can go across to our web page, and there we go. So our lines are proportionally a nicer length for the size of our font. That's a good start. And the next thing that we can do is change the line height. Now, it would be super normal to have our line height set to 1.2, and that's the default for most browsers, and it's almost the default value for printed text. But in a browser, a little bit more space makes it more comfortable to read on the screen. So let's put line height. That's for body text. We'll set that to 1.6. And note we have no unit for our line height. It's assumed to be based on the size of the text. I think that's better. Next, we better do something about styling our headings and our paragraphs. Specifically, we have this thing at the moment where our H2s are kind of floating right in the middle of the paragraphs, in between the paragraphs. And it doesn't really look like those headings belong to the paragraph underneath them. Is change the margins of our H2s and our paragraphs just to close that gap a little bit. And there we go. Let's head back to our page and reload it, and you can see that those paragraphs just creep up underneath those H2 headings. And we can see that they definitely do belong together now. That's a lot better. But the next thing I want to do is give ourselves some fun fonts to work with, or at least one font. And for that, I'm going to head across to Google Fonts. Okay, so we're at fonts.google.com, and you can see there's, oh yeah, look, we're looking at the moment at 832 of 832 font families. So there's plenty to choose from, and we've got this filtering ability over here, and we can sort them and filter them by languages and what have you. So that's all very handy, and there's a bazillion fonts there. They range in quality. Some are great, some are decent, some are famously overused, but you can see that we've got lots and lots there. And I have a particular font in mind, which I found by searching for SC. It's kind of an annoying thing to have to search for, because I wanted a font with small caps. And all the small caps fonts, as far as I can tell, maybe not 100% of them, but most of them finish with SC. As we can see, Playfair display SC. And I was looking for a particular font, and here it is here, Alegria SC. And I decided I want that one. So I'm going to click the plus, and it says, oh, one font family selected. But you know, I could actually go through and look at the font page, which is quite nice. You can see they've got this nice layout of the font, showing you what the characters are, or the glyphs are, and suggested font pairings, a bit of information about the font and the person who designed it. All very interesting. But anyway, we've selected the font, and now we can go down and click this guy, and this is what we use to download or import the font. And Google's handily giving us a little indicator of how long it thinks it'll take to load the font as it is. So we're just getting the font in its regular 400 weight, but we could go and say, oh, we want the italic font, and we want the bold version, and the bold italic, and the black. And as you can see, Google lets us know that, well, this is going to take a bit longer to load if we get all of this. And we add the extended support, and then finally Google's telling us, man, it's going to be slow. So we don't really want any of this anyway. So I'll just go and deselect all of that, and we're going to go back over to here to embed, and we're going to use import. So we've already got our style tags, because we're just kind of naively putting all our styles into our HTML. So I'm going to grab that and then head back to our code and put that straight in the top of our CSS. Now, when we do an import of a font like this, it needs to be at the very tippy top of the CSS. And what we can do now is, for our H1s and H2s, we can say H1, H2, and we can say font family, and it's going to be, first we'll have Alegria SC, and then I think Giorgio, you can see the editor wants to help me, but I'm not letting it. And then we'll head for serif. Okay, so now our headings are going to have the Alegria typeface. And for our body, I'm just going to set our font family to sans serif. Now, why have I done that? Why not list a bunch of sans serif typefaces? Well, because I don't really want to import another font from Google Fonts, because one's enough for now. And we don't really know what device this is going to display upon, because if we end up on Android, Android's going to want to either show us whatever it thinks Helvetica or Arial or whatever it looks like, or Roboto, which actually looks pretty nice. Or we don't want to make a Mac display Arial instead of Helvetica, because Helvetica on a Mac looks much nicer than Arial, and it's the other way around on Windows. So for this instance, we'll just let it choose the System Sans Serif font, which usually works out to be the nicest one. So having said all of that, let's head back to the browser and give it a reload. And now we've got our small caps headings. But the thing I want to do next is have a couple of columns. Yeah, so I want to break our two H2 subheadings or H2 sections, if you will, and have them sitting side by side as two columns. So what are we going to do that? Well, here's the CSS we can use to do that. And we're going to define a CSS class called half-col and give it a width of 48 and say it floats to the left. Then we have half-col plus half-col with margin left to 4%. What does that mean? If you haven't run across float before, float will make whatever's being floated, it'll take it out of the normal flow of CSS layout and stick it to the far either left or right, depending on whether we say left or right, of whatever component it's inside of. The interesting thing is that this is a way of stacking things up either from the left or from the right. And it's half-col plus half-col. This is a special kind of CSS selector, which is basically saying where we have a thing on the left-hand side of the plus, immediately followed by a thing on the right-hand side of the plus, apply this styling, margin left, 4%, to the thing that's on the right-hand side of the plus. Which is a long way around of saying, I guess, if we have two half-cols right next to each other, give the second one margin left 4%. So we'll put that in the code and then we'll see how it looks on the page. And there it is. We've got our half-col style with the width of 48% and floating to the left. And then we've got our special plus selector saying where there's two half-cols side by side or one after the other really, give the second one 4% margin on the left. Let's have a look in the code. And of course there's like no change because I actually need to go and change the HTML, of course. This sadly is not just going to happen on its own. I need to do div class equals, what did I say, half col. Yeah. I'll have another one here. Okay, and then of course, after that, we'll need a closing div. And then another one down here. And then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We need to move all of that in. Okay. Yeah. Right. Now let's look at the page. Reload. And there we have our two columns. And you can see that they're taking up the available space of our body, which is 35 ems wide. And so they both get 48% of that, with a little 4% gap in between them. But you can see that our H2 titles are looking a little gross at the moment. That's because they've still got, I guess, a line height of 1.6 or something. Anyway, we better change that. So we set our line height at 1.6 in the body, and then our poor old H1 and H2, when they break over a line, look kind of gappy. So let's say the line height, I'll set that back to 1.2. There. And go back over here, and here we go. Our titles are looking a little nicer now. But what if we go and, look, I'll just get out of full screen mode here, and we go and squash this down. You can see I've got my developer console open in the middle. Yeah, this isn't so good, right? We make the page small and our text just runs off the side. So that's not great. Here we are defining our columns, and this is what we're going to do when our page gets smaller. So we've got a media query, and the way to read this, if you haven't run across them before, is we're saying, well, if we've got some media, and this is only for the screen, other options here are for print or voice. I think that's it as far as I know. So if we've got a screen, and when we say max width 660 pixels, really what that means is if the screen is 660 pixels wide or less, then we should apply these rules, these styling rules, which is to say the body should be 85% wide. I don't know if you can say 85% wide. The width of the body should be 85% of the window, and we will have a typo margin of 15%. I didn't really want that. I think I wanted pixels, but anyway, this is what we're going to have. I'll probably change that in the code. And then for our half col, we will set the width to 100% and it won't float anymore. We'll set float to none. And then finally, with our plus CSS selector, we'll set the margin to 0, so that special case we put in previously to make sure that the column on the right had some margin on the left. Well, we don't want that anymore. And so we'll take the margins away from it. You might be wondering, hey, couldn't we have just put that margin 0 into the half col rule, which defines the width and the float? And no, we can't. We cannot. That's because this half col plus half col is more specific than the half col rule alone. And the more specific rule always wins. So the one inside the media query for half col wouldn't overrule the half col plus half col rule that's outside the media query. Boy, does that make sense? I hope so. Anyway, here's our code, and let's update it with a media query. Yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted 20 pixels there. I didn't want 15%. So we're going with 20 pixels rather than 15%. I'll save that now and head back onto our browser and reload it. And we can see straight away that our text has reformatted into a single column and that we've got a bit of a margin around it. And then as our page gets narrower and narrower and narrower, the text reforms to accommodate the size of the page. And of course, as we go wider and we grow past the 660 mark, you can see that it jumps between one column and two columns. So this is a responsive page. Now, that's not always really the best option, hand-rolling your own CSS columns. Because if you're on a large and complex page, you probably want more than 2 columns. You may want many columns of differing widths, and that can get it's not super complicated, but it can turn into a bit of a headache. So let's take a look at another option for implementing columns on your web page. And that other option, of course, is Bootstrap. And so Bootstrap implements all these different column sizes and columns for differently sized devices as well. So we could have just column 4, it's basically what is a column. Or we could have col_sm for, sm stands for small, which means it'll display as a column on a small device. But if we go to an extra small device, then it will no longer be a column and just flow into a single normally sized column of text. So once again, if we just go and unembiggen this and start squishing these around, you can see how that these columns of Bootstraps change around. And you can see we can do nice things like spanning, one column spanning across 2 columns and have these other 2 here and so on. So let's have a go at using Bootstrap in our code. So here we are in our code, and what we can do is we can have a little link. We say rel equals, in quotes, style sheet, and then we can say type equals text CSS, and then it's href equals, yeah, all of that. Okay, so this is a way of importing our Bootstrap CSS into our document. And I'll just have to put this inside a div as well. And we'll give it a class. We'll give it a Bootstrap class. Yeah. Class equals call that md12. I think that's how it goes. Anyway, and so that's a way of saying I want a column that spans like 12 columns. It's like a mega column. And this is because Bootstrap's grid, the thing that defines all these columns, is divided up into 12 equal columns. And when we say column to 12, then we're saying we want something that's 12 columns wide. And I've said 12 so many times now that I lost count of how many lines I want to shift across. And so instead of using our hand-rolled little columns here, we can go and ditch that and say col LMD6, and we can do the same here. And what that means is that we can ditch an awful lot of this. Let's well, we'll certainly get rid of our half col and half col and half col and half col business. And let's try that for now and see how we come out. I think we need to set the width of our body either. Margin 0, auto. Yeah, let's keep it at that right now. And so if we head across to our page, we do a reload, we can see that we've got our document. Probably we should have constrained the size of the document a little bit. Yeah, because that's a bit broad really, isn't it? Let's like undo that. Give that a reload. There we go. Okay, so here's our document. And as we can see that once we start to squish it up a bit, it flows between 1 and 2 columns. I might have been a bit hasty in getting rid of our media query to stop the page from being 35 Ms all the time, but you can see how we can use Bootstrap to implement columns as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you'd like to know more, remember you can check out the full article on lukefabish.com, and also if you'd like to see more of this, don't forget to hit subscribe at the bottom of the screen there. Bye for now.